we have a lot. We're trying to fit in half an hour here, so these three presentations will definitely be much shorter than the last couple you've seen here. But
Go, Pete. I have to warn the federal review team. There's maybe some healthy competition between the long-range planning and performance management.
That's all right. When Dale asked for the data, that's what I've got. Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about our Hampton Roads congestion management process here. So this is a report. It's an ongoing process. We update the data continuously, but in terms of a report, we update it every 5 years to make sure it matches the LRTP cycle. We try to wrap up the data analysis so we have it in time for when the project prioritization process kicks off. We have all that great data that we can plug it in there. So in our most recent CMP update, we released it in 3 parts. You'll notice part 1 came out just as the pandemic was starting, so it was really interesting timing when we were wrapping that up and presenting that analysis as nobody was driving and everything like that. So it was definitely interesting, but we did do it in 3 parts. I'll go over each of these individually on here, but we did just wrap up part 3 in 2023, but it's time to start up again. So we had the kickoff for the CMP 2025 report at our TTAC meeting a couple months ago. Get feedback from them. So we are just starting the process again, like I said, so we can make sure we have it ready to feed into the long-range transportation plan project prioritization process. So for this last go around, we wanted to make sure there was FHWA guidance that was released in terms of successful CMPs and some of the elements that are included in those. And there were these 8 items included in the FHWA guidance. So we wanted to make sure we included everything from the best practices. So throughout our CMP 2020 report, we even called out every single section, if it was number 2, number 4, whatever, just to make sure we use this as a checklist and make sure everything that was included in our CMP matches the guidance that FHWA put out a few years ago. In terms of system monitoring, there's a few reports that we put out on an annual basis as part of our performance management effort that I want to call out a little bit more here, and we do highlight them in the CMP as well. The first one is the State of Transportation Report. The picture you see on the right is just an example of a page from it regarding rail travel in our region. This is where we look at all aspects of transportation in our region, anything we can get our hands on data-wise. So air travel, rail, the ports, roadway travel, obviously active transportation. We even look at air quality, things like that. So like I said, anything we can get our hands on data on, we include. We try to do a 10-year trend to see what's improving, maybe where we need to make improvement. We also try to compare ourselves with other comparable metropolitan areas. So we have a list of 41 metropolitan areas between 1 and 4 million people. So if we can get that data, we can compare ourselves to see how does air travel compared to other areas, or air quality, or congestion levels, things like that, just to benchmark in terms of these are things we do particularly well on Hampton Roads. Maybe these are areas where we don't do as well. Another report we do annually is the TPO Annual Roadway Performance Report. So this is where we look at collecting traffic volumes, roadway congestion levels, drill down to that data. We collect it on an annual basis. We release a report. We also include it on our website, and we also include where you can download shape files or mapping from HRTPO, which is prepared by the HRPDC. So we try to make that information as easy to obtain as possible if you're in the public. The third one there, regional performance measures and targets. I'll talk a lot more about that during the performance-based planning and programming item tomorrow, so I don't want to go too much into that annual effort that we do there. Some other things we include in the CMP, we look at regional roadway travel and trends. We look primarily at continuous count stations, which we have about 80 in our region, so we can look at those, collect data every second of the year to kind of come up with regional estimates in terms of how much roadway travel is changing. It was really good during the pandemic. We would had a pretty real-time look at how travel is changing in our region, and now we've looked over the last few years to see, as we get closer to pre-pandemic conditions, we're still not there in our region. We're still about 5% lower than we had prior to the pandemic, but we do keep track of all that information and incorporate it into our CMP. As you know, bridges and tunnels are very critical in our region. So we drill down into what goes on at the bridges and tunnels in terms of travel times, congestion levels, things like that, and just call those out a little bit more specifically. Last thing there, We did look at a subset of recently completed projects to look at the benefits of those projects in terms of travel time and congestion. We tried to do a wide variety where anything we could get pretty good and after data. So it wasn't just roadway widenings. We looked at intersection improvements, signal coordination projects, things like that. So like I said, we tried to do a subset. I think it was 10 to 14, I forget the exact number, where we were able to get good data and show the benefits of those recently completed projects. The meat of our CMP is where we do our analysis of the system performance. So we have what's called our CMP roadway network. It includes anything that's a minor arterial and above and selected collectors based on connectivity, maybe importance to the military, connections to activity centers, things like that. In total, we look at about 1,600 centerline miles of roadway in our region. We're actually expanding that a little bit in the 2025 to include more rural roadways. That was a recommendation that came from a couple of our rural stakeholders. So we are going to expand it by about 100 miles, mostly in the rural areas for CMP 2025. In terms of what we look at in these roadways, we collect travel time and speed data through INRIX and download it from RIDIS that we thankfully DDOT pays for the license that we can access the data for. We look at congestion various ways. One is the level during the peak periods, so the intensity of congestion. Also look at the duration. So is a roadway congested for 15 minutes or is it congested for 4 hours during the peak period? We want to know the difference between those when we look at it. Total delay, so that's where we tie in traffic volume data to the speed data, so we know total amount of person hours of delay for each user on these roadway segments. Travel time reliability, we use the federal measures of LOTTR, level of travel time reliability. When we do that for the entire CMP roadway network, so we know which ones are the most reliable or maybe ones where reliability is an issue. Also freight movement, we look a lot of that as part of our freight study, but we do include some of that information as part of our CMP. So we take all that information and we try to prioritize or rank various corridors in our region to determine which ones rank the highest and ones that we should look at in a little more detail in terms of what might be some solutions to improving congestion in those corridors. So we look at freeways and arterials. We rank the freeways and we take the top 10 freeways and look at those in more detail. And we look at the top 20 arterials. We actually had 21 because we had a tie for number 20 in CMP 2020. But we did look at 21 corridors in more detail. And we score them based on the criteria you see on the right. A lot of the stuff I already mentioned in terms of congestion, travel time reliability, freight. We did incorporate safety as well, and then also roadway type. So as a part of the strategic highway network, as a part of the national highway system, or part of our TPO roadway serving the military network, we do give additional points for that. So the corridors that rank the highest and those criteria on the right are the ones that you see on the map on the left. From there, we work with the localities and try to get this data all produced and see if we can come up with some solutions for the congestion we see in those corridors. This example you see here is Route 199 outside of Williamsburg in James City County. So this is a pretty congested corridor, especially during the PM peak period. A lot of bedroom communities, I would say, in James City County. So travel between more inner Hampton roads and going to those areas of James City County. So we pull all that information, any recent projects that have been completed, and then any projects that are currently funded for that corridor. Then what we have is what we call our congestion management strategy toolbox. There's 5 different strategies and many sub-strategies, but you start with trying to figure out ways to eliminate trips, ways to shift trips to other modes, maybe shifting from single occupancy vehicles to high occupancy. Strategy 4 is roadway operations. How can we improve operations? And then finally, the last one at the bottom, if nothing else makes sense, increasing capacity. So based on the data we have, based on site visits, and based on conversations we have with locality staff, we come up with observations and possible causes of congestion, and then also a list of congestion mitigation strategies. This information, once again, is shared with the localities, but this also feeds into the long-range transportation planning process and some of the candidate projects, particularly that'll feed into the 2050 LRTP. So I just wanted to wrap up in terms of other ways we incorporate this into our planning process. As I mentioned at the start, a lot of the data that we analyze as part of the CMP feeds directly into the project prioritization tool, whether it's for the LRTP or for John and his work in the RSTP, now that all their projects are scored with that tool. So we make sure we have that data analysis and can feed it directly into the tool. We do share it with locality staff so they can use it for any of their planning needs, but also for coming up with project proposals. And then, as I mentioned, even though the report comes out on a 5-year cycle, we consistently update the data, whether it's traffic volume, speeds, all that. We do all of that on an annual basis, and everything you see in the state of transportation. We do also update those on an annual basis. So that's a very, very quick overview of the CMP. I guess I'll turn it over to questions on this before we go to the military.
Very good presentation, very concise, to the point. I always, I admire your CMP, I admire your work that you do in producing this report, Keith, so great job, thank you so much.
Definitely appreciate it. Sam will do the presentation on the military, and then I'll wrap up with a break.
Good afternoon, I'm Sam Belfield with HRTPO staff, and one of the things that I do is military planning efforts, and so just going to brief you on some of the activities we've been doing.
I'm sorry, Sam, speak louder for short minutes.
As you know, we have a large military presence in the region. They're an integral part of our regional economy, and they're a tremendous asset to our communities. And so, it's not only important for for our nation, but it's important to our region. So we want to protect that asset. What is the primary reason that we incorporate military into our transportation planning efforts? Well, defense readiness and efficient military operations require a sufficient transportation network in order for them to move their cargo personnel as quickly and efficiently as possible. And so we want to help them in the best way we can.
Question, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Talk to us a little bit about how this initiative began, the idea, the concept.
Yeah, I'm gonna step it right through it. All right, so we've had a long-standing relationship with the military since the 70s. We've had, kind of dabbled in, have had them involved with the TTAC and things like that. But back in 2011, we established what's called the Military Transportation Needs Study. That was a specific study geared directly towards the military. And the purpose of that was to determine the military transportation needs in a number of different ways to provide both an efficient, safe transportation network for the military in the region.
Was that a request that came from the military to the board, or was that something?
Yeah, that was based on some comments that we had from the military.
Okay.
So we just thought that it would be an important initiative that we specifically look at straw net beyond that. And so today we currently have representation from the military that sit as non-voting members on both the TPO board and the TTAC. And we're actively engaged in a number of different studies, both our staff interacts with them. The straw net, as you're probably familiar with, was established back in the 50s. It's a system of highways, primarily made up of interstate system, but also has local roadways that lead in and out of military installations called straw net connectors. And so within Hampton Roads region, we have a number of those, and we want to make sure that they're accurate and efficient and ready for movement of that personnel and cargo. This is a map that shows both the straw net roadways, which are shown in blue, as well as the non-straw net roadways that we've identified that serve other facilities or other DoD sites outside of straw net facilities. And so together, we've created this network called Roadways Serving the Military. And so what we do is we give priority points within the prioritization tool, both to the blue network and the red, so that they're incorporated and given credit. The initiative started with what's called Phase 1 back in September of 2011. It's called the Highway Network Analysis Report. We examined the adequacy of the straw net designations, and then we looked at a number of different deficiencies along that network, ranging from congestion to bridge condition, lane widths, that type of thing. Phase 2, back in 2012, we did a comprehensive military commuter survey. As part of our public outreach, it was focused directly to the military, and we received nearly 11,000 responses from from that. A little bit from that, one of the questions that we asked were, what are some of the transportation problems that you're seeing going to and from work during your commute? You can see congestion was number one. They definitely were concerned about traffic backups at the military gates. A lot of times they could get to the gate, but then they're stuck at the gate. So you can just see the different issues that were identified as a part of that. One of the questions that we did as a part of this survey was we asked them specifically about, would you be interested in a shuttle circulator service route within your military installation? Because that was something that had been discussed in the region, so we wanted to hear from them directly. And based on that, we had 2,470 at Naval Station Norfolk said yes, they would be interested in that. So as a result, we made a recommendation to our board to provide that service. And in 2021, the RTAP made that recommendation. And then just this past May, we got a briefing from HRT that talked about how successful that this HRT Base Express has been doing. One concern that they have about it is the future funding of it. So definitely want to pursue that going forward. Phase 3, we expanded to look at sea level rise and storm surge impacts to the roadways that serve the military. So this is just a snapshot of that analysis where we look at flooding vulnerable segments. 2018, we did a comprehensive update to Phase 1 and Phase 3. A lot of those deficiencies changed. They changed very quickly, and so we wanted to make sure that this document was current and up to date, and that's something that we do on an ongoing basis. StrawNet revisions is another thing that our staff does. Back in April of 2022, Ivan was involved with this as well. Our agency that's within this building, the Hampton Roads Military Federal Facilities Alliance, their staff sent me an email and said, hey, I-564 intermodal connector is a new project, but I noticed that it's not on StrawNet. What do you think about that? So we got in touch with our federal partners, the SCDC, and told them about that. And we had a number of conversations online. We had some online meetings, and then very quickly we were able to make that request to Federal Highway, and it got approved in June of 2022 to be added. We also provide assistance to other military regions. I sit on the Transportation Research Board Standing Committee for Transportation for National Defense. And the reason for that is that we wrote a paper called Integrating the Military into the MPO process back in 2013, and that was accepted as a part of that. And once that got accepted, a lot of the stakeholders were really involved in engaging with our region, and they wanted me to be a part of that committee.
Is that date continuing?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm currently
You're
on
still
that.
there. Okay.
Yes. And so more recently, last summer, we were selected to be one of 6 regions showcased for best practices to be as part of this Military at the Table, a guide for agency coordination and transportation planning and decision making. The SCDC, along with a number of different agencies, made this request to put out this guidebook to help out other regions. And so we participated in an interview, and that guidebook should be released sometime this summer. We also provide assistance to our local military efforts. The HRPDC has conducted a number of different joint land use studies. Our TPO staff has participated in all of those. And we provide technical assistance. We provide our documents in terms of what the military planning documents that we've done over the years to the consultants that are working on those and heavily engaged in all of those. We also have provided technical assistance on various transportation management plans in the region, and most recently the 2023 Langley USIS TMP. We participated as a part of that as well. In terms of next steps, as I said, this is an ongoing process. We incorporate StrawNet. Something that we have not included are PPP routes, which are power projection platform routes. Those are, they lead from Joint Base Langley Eustis into our Port of Virginia within our region. And so we definitely want to give points within our prioritization tool for those routes because it's important to the military. And so that's a way that we can kind of tweak what we're currently awarding within our project prioritization tool. We've also been advocating to the state and VDOT and OIP in terms of incorporating StrawNet and PPP routes into the smart scale project prioritization process. Because a lot of national leaders in the DoD say that certain regions like Hampton Roads are already doing that for their region, but they're not doing it on a statewide level. And then we also, as I talked about, we provide assistance to other military regions, and then we are continually updating the military needs study on an ongoing basis.
Now we're at the session of talking about some of the freight planning efforts we do here in our region. Freight transportation is obviously very important in our region for multiple reasons. One of which is we are the third largest container port on the East Coast behind New York and Savannah. But on top of that, we have the largest growth actually of any East Coast port since the pandemic. Looking at the 2023 data, even though we did see a decrease from 2022, everybody else did as well. So we still have the largest growth from any East Coast port when you go through 2023, and that's actually by quite a bit. So we expect that growth to continue here, especially you heard about earlier today, Port 460 in Suffolk, which will be the fourth largest distribution center on the East Coast. So we expect this growth to just continue by leaps and bounds as we move into the future here. We're also the largest exporter of coal in the country. That primarily comes by rail from West Virginia and Western Virginia to facilities both on the peninsula and on the south side. But every year, when you look at the data, we are the largest exporter of coal. So because freight is so important in our region, about 15 years ago, the TPO board decided to create a committee specifically related to freight. And that was to provide a better opportunity for people within the freight industry itself to contribute to the regional freight, to the regional transportation planning process. So the committee is called the Freight Transportation Advisory Committee. The chair of the FTAC is actually a non-voting member of the HRTPO board. So he sits in on all the TPO board meetings and provides the perspective of the freight community to the mayors and chairs that sit in on the FTAC. There are 9 members, 8 currently, there's a vacant spot. We try to get a wide representation of different aspects of freight movement. So the chair is actually in trucking. We have the vice chair as the head of the Virginia Maritime Association, but we also have manufacturing. Newport News Shipbuilding, which is the largest employer in our region, sits in on it. We have a short line railroad. Gibbons is distribution centers and trucking. And then Colliers is in the development real estate realm when it comes to freight. So like I said, we really try to get as wide a variety of perspectives as we can on the Freight Transportation Advisory Committee to provide guidance as we go through our transportation planning process. We have a number of efforts that the FTAC has put together through the years. This is definitely not an all-encompassing list by any stretch, but I just wanted to highlight a few of them. They have requested a number of freight-related special studies. I'll go over those in detail here in a slide or two. More detail. They provide input throughout the process, whether it's the long-range transportation plan or the regional freight study, which I'll also go into in detail. But I think Dale's presented at every FTAC meeting for the last year, it seems like, providing some of the output that we put together and gathering feedback from them every step along the way so that we make sure our LRTP accurately portrays the perspectives of the freight community. We've asked them to weigh in on a number of different resolutions. You can see them on there, whether it's I-87 between Hampton Roads and Raleigh, the Hampton Roads crossing study, and a few other ones. We actually did call a special meeting a few months ago of the FTAC, specifically where we could get some information for the USDOT's request for information on the National Multimodal Freight Network. So the TPO submitted comments on behalf of the FTAC, but we wanted to make sure that we got their feedback on what they think from a Hampton Roads perspective we should look for in terms of the National Multimodal Freight Network. And that last bullet, as I mentioned, the FTAC chair does sit in on the board, so he provides a 1 to 2 minute background on FTAC actions to the mayors and chairs at every HRTPO board meeting. One of the big efforts we do regarding freight planning is what we call our regional freight study. So it's a comprehensive resource where we look at as many aspects of the freight network as we can in our region. We provide an inventory of all the freight facilities in our region, how we integrate it into the planning process. We look at the commodity flows, so what's going in and out of our region, what quantities. We do look at trucks specifically and regional truck movements. So what roadways are they using? What are some high use roadways by trucks? What are the truck bottlenecks, which we base largely on truck hours of delay? So combining that travel time data you get from INRIX along with number of trucks. And that's the type of information we feed into the long-range transportation plan so we can prioritize those projects. We do update that on a recurring basis. 2017 was when the last update is. We are nearly wrapping up our update here, so we're hoping by the end of 2024 to have the draft of that available and start sharing the results of that with our FTAC and other committees so that it can be finalized early in 2025. One thing that was born out of the regional freight study, as I mentioned, we do an inventory of freight facilities in our region. We decided it'd be much better if we had an interactive tool that we could share with the public or anybody who wanted to use it in terms of what the regional freight facilities are and tie some information to it. So Kyle was very valuable in helping us prepare all this and put together this interactive map. So I think it was about a year ago maybe when it went live. I think it was last summer when it went live. But you can highlight any roadways in terms of truck volumes, railroads, port facilities, anything you see there, distribution centers, a lot of different types of freight centers. You can call them up and turn those layers on and off. It's all downloadable data. So we're very proud of that. We want to update it on an annual basis. So once the regional freight study is completed here in the next few months, we'll take that information from there and tie it to the interactive map. And like I said, hopefully that the public finds some use out of that, or even real estate developers and anybody who wants to access it, we can put it out there and they can use that information. As I mentioned, the FTAC does ask us quite regularly to prepare special studies related to freight movement. You can see some of them here on the left. Like I said, about every couple of years, they've asked us to look at something. For example, they wanted us to look at the economic assessment of tolls on freight in the region when tolls were really starting to be discussed after they were implemented at the downtown and midtown tunnel in 2015. So we drilled down into that. One I do want to highlight, though, is one that's ongoing there at the bottom, the Hampton Roads Rail Crossing Study. The FTAC requested that we look at this because of the new monies that are available in the IIJA in terms of creating the new program for eliminating railroad crossings. So we said we'd be happy to do that and ultimately come up with a prioritized list of crossings throughout our region. So maybe we didn't know what we didn't know, but we started the process and quickly realized that preparing an inventory was going to be much more difficult than we expected, both with data availability, but also tying all the different sources of data into one source, because we had never prepared a inventory of rail crossings. So that's taken longer than we expected, but we do have the inventory created now of all roughly 617 rail crossings we have in our region. There was an issue right around when the East Palestine derailment happened where we were contacted by, I think it was city councils, if you remember that. I think from Portsmouth and Chesapeake in particular, but it is a problem throughout the region where there's areas, both residential and commercial, that might be accessible only by one way in and out, and that way crosses a railroad. So there's concerns, well, not only if there's a derailment there and the impacts on those localities, on those communities, but also what happens for emergency response if somebody needs an ambulance, but there's a train that's going 2 miles an hour across. So we have identified areas throughout our region where these locations where you can only get one way in and out of the area across a railroad, identified the number of residences or if it was commercial, the number of employers, number of employees, things like that in those areas. So we do want to highlight those areas as part of the study where this is an issue moving forward. Ultimately,
May I pause a second? This was an interesting situation for us. So with VDOT, our VDOT partners in the Hampton Roads District Office, Pavitra and I attended a Saturday afternoon session out at Bowers Hill. And there was an adjacent neighborhood, and we met at their church. And we went out because the topic was the Bowers Hill interchange. We had really engaged conversation about that. But a byproduct of that was they said, "Well, you're here. Can we talk to you about this train?" And with the length of the train, with all the freight, the train sitting in their neighborhood more frequently, and the situation Keith just described, they expressed to us. So, while we had great conversations about why we went there, which was Bowers Hill, they really helped us understand that concern, which is, what, and then Keith got on it and started this analysis so we can come up with some strategies. So I just wanted to use that as an example of, that type of outreach, Pavitra, that, you were there that afternoon as well.
We actually used Google Earth just to I zoomed in every single area that was a potential isolated area and identified those polygons.
So where we're at in the study now is the third bullet, where we're prioritizing at-grade crossings using various factors that we were able to inventory. So roadway types, vehicle train volumes, estimated delays, largely driven by those vehicle train volumes, speeds, things like that. Emergency response, and we are incorporating equity as well, largely based on the transportation vulnerable community information that Dale was presenting there. So we got our feedback throughout this process, both from the FTAC, but we've also presented to the CAC and the TTAC as well. We prepared, based on their comments, a draft prioritization scoring system, and now we've gone back to all three of those committees, the FTAC, the CAC, and the TTAC, and said, here's our thoughts, what do you think we should do? And we're incorporating their comments, so it's an iterative process. But we have finally got to the point where we've gotten their feedback and blessing, I would say, in terms of the scoring system we're going to use for it. So we're aiming for the late September FTAC meeting to share a draft prioritization of those rail crossings in our region, share it with that group and see if it makes sense. And assuming it does, then we'll move on to the next steps, which are to evaluate candidate projects for those lists. We want to come up with a list of about top 10 crossings total that we think would make the most sense to go for funding. Maybe it's not the top 10 in terms of priority, but maybe in terms of going down, if this would be the best candidate for a project that we could submit for federal funding, things like that. And then we were also asked to identify the data that would be required for these projects. So looking at the federal guidelines and what type of information do we need to provide on these 10-ish crossings to submit for federal funding. As I mentioned, we are wrapping up the prioritization and have that in September. So we're hoping to be completely wrapped up with the study and have a draft early in 2025 to share. I just wanted to wrap up in terms of talking about some of the other ways we incorporate freight. When we look at the project prioritization process, we incorporate freight many different ways in there. We do have a separate category for intermodal and freight projects. A lot of these, like at-grade rail crossing, separate improvements to grade separations will fall into that type of category, but there are some other ones that do fall in there as well. But even in the other categories, we do incorporate freight, whether it's truck travel time reliability, travel times for trips to the ports, truck zones, I'll talk about on the next slide. A number of things you can see here, but we do have a number of, all that data that we include in the project prioritization process, a lot of it is specific to freight. We do incorporate freight into the regional travel demand model. I won't go into too much detail on there, but we do know, based on the model, where we expect trucks to travel in the future based on different sociodynamic factors and truck zones. I do want to highlight, though, we do collaborate with the Port of Virginia and the FTAC throughout this process, have them review our data, have them call out to us what they think certain areas should be designated as truck zones. We work with the port in terms of their TEU estimates for the future. So it's a collaborative process with the BPA and the FTAC to make sure that what we incorporate into our model hopefully best represents what we expect freight to look like in the year 2050 now as we move forward. So That's everything I have in terms of freight. Do you have any questions or comments on this?
I would say that the updated plan does take into consideration the expected increase in freight, I guess, movement with vehicles and goods.
Yes, in different levels where it could just be like a conservative growth or, the most optimistic, and then where those truck travel patterns will be. We're incorporating all that into the plan.
And also those scenarios, if you want, the scenarios there are different assumptions in terms of Port of Virginia activity in those different scenarios. Some have higher estimates, some have a little lower estimates, but the scenario planning takes into account that as well.
Has Region talked about the need for more truck parking?
Yes.
And I guess,
We're gonna have a section about that.
okay.
Yes, it's included in our freight study. We have had multiple discussions at the FTAC. Eric Johnson, who handles the truck parking program for the state from VDOT, he sits in on FTAC meetings, but he's also presented at least twice that I remember, specific to truck parking concerns in our region. So yes, but we do have a section in particular in the regional freight study devoted to truck parking.
If you don't mind, we have Barbara Nelson from the Virginia Port Authority who is on remotely that Keith, who was texting me, would like to comment that was with Keith and Sam and the team very, very well. Oh, hi, Barbara.
Hello, good afternoon. As a reformed MPOer, I found the tip discussion riveting, but because I used, well, you got to be able to follow the money, but freight was what I was really hanging on for. And I just, to our federal partners and to the TPO partners and any other guests who have joined, just on behalf of the Port of Virginia, wanted to express our appreciation to the incredible effort and the longstanding effort and partnership that we've had with the Hampton Roads TPO to raise the awareness and the integration of freight-related issues into every corner of transportation in the region. And just, I'm here happy to answer any questions, but Keith and team, Sam, Pavitra, Dale, Kyle, I mean, that interactive warehouse map and distribution center map, that's a really cool tool and incredibly useful. And the team at the TPO just does a super job, and we're happy to be their partner in the processes. So if I can answer any specific questions about how we work together, I'm happy to do that. But again, thanks to them for all they do.
I apologize. I should have said that much better in terms of the FTAC. It's a TPO committee, but we work hand in hand with Barb and her team. The port is the one who hosts the meetings. She's also the one that sets up our relationships. So, as a TPO, we don't have relationships with a lot of these great people, but Barb does. So she introduces them to us and gets us working hand in hand with the trucking firms and things like that. So it's definitely a great relationship, and we appreciate all the help that Barb and her team provides to us as we administer the FTAC.
Great presentation. Thank you, Keith. I'm kind of hesitant, Bob, I'm kind of hesitant to ask about connection to the work that you're doing in the Regional Freight Transportation Advisory Committee and the work being done at the State Freight Advisory Committee.
I'm happy to jump into that water if you want me to.
No. So let's put it this way: were you all actively involved in developing of the current state freight plan?
Yes.
Freight plan? You were okay.
Yes, I was, and working with Undersecretary Valentine, who preceded this administration. Now we have Secretary Miller. Worked together with our partners at VDOT and DRPT to, in response to the Secretary's direction, to convene a statewide freight advisory committee. And one of the, shining star examples that we've shared often, early and often, in addition to the great examples that the FHWA resource teams were able to share, examples from across the country with us on statewide freight advisory committees, was, our homegrown version here in Virginia, and what, through a continuous planning process and data collection and analysis process, you can do to, to really incorporate freight into the transportation planning process. And, sometimes things take a little longer to get started. But I was reflecting this morning, we had at the port a motor carrier committee meeting. We have a few specialized committees where we work with various partners, and this was our motor carrier committee. And Teresa Brooks from the TPO was presenting to our motor carrier committee on the upcoming LRTP, and sharing with them information about the LRTP, and asking for input on bottlenecks or opportunities that maybe should be incorporated and included in the 2050 update. It's just one more example of the tight knitting of the relationship that we have with the TPO, and the staff just does a terrific job, and they've even shared from the TPO here in Hampton Roads, have shared with the statewide Freight Advisory Committee, which is, I think it's fair to say it's still in its infancy, informative effort. But they've been able to share some of their practices and best practices, and I'm confident that we are going to have a strong statewide Freight Advisory Committee in the future. We've got the will, now we just need to keep it going.
Thanks, Barb. Great comments. Great job. Great job. I don't have anything else. Because what did you safety resilience climate change? Pull out 100-page slide presentation. Are we safe with that agenda? I don't even know. How do you all feel?
Yeah, we are past time of the agenda that, at least the discussion topics were to end at 5 p.m. And we do have the public meeting at 6 p.m. here. If I don't want to keep anyone waiting, we could.
We want to capture this good work while we're doing. So,
I'm fine with going ahead. Safety shouldn't take too long.
Okay.
You want to
some good work.
hit the gong at 5:30 if we're still talking? Make sure we stop. So I'll go. All right, I'll go ahead and start with the safety one then. Obviously safety is number one priority when it comes to roadway transportation planning. When you're talking about people's lives and health, it's very important. So we make sure we incorporate it in a number of different ways. The project prioritization process, which we've talked about multiple times today, we do tie safety into that as well. So you get points based on safety improvements that would be expected for each of these candidate projects. We do sit in on a number of statewide and regional committees. So for example, I sit in on the Virginia Strategic Highway Safety Plan Steering Committee and can provide the MPO and Hampton Roads perspective when it comes to that. We do assist localities with a number of their safety planning efforts. For example, Virginia Beach recently completed their safety action plan. I sat in on that one. Teresa sits in on the Portsmouth version of that. So we're fortunate to be asked to provide our perspective on some of their local safety planning efforts. Most of what I want to talk about today, though, is our regional safety study, and then I'll turn it over to Rob to talk about a special study that he recently completed looking at safety. So the regional safety study, we recently completed that update. We released updates on that about every 10 years. But this time around, we wanted to make sure that it was compliant with the new Safe Streets and Roads for All discretionary grant program and all the stipulations that go with that. So we wanted to make this study available, particularly for our smaller localities that may not have either the funding or the expertise to tie in, to be able to use our regional plan so that they can go after the SS4A funding for any of their particular projects. One thing that was new this time is we did create a regional safety study working group with regional safety stakeholders. So I think there was a total of about 20 people that were on that committee off and on, depending as they moved to various jobs. But try to get as many different perspectives as we could, big localities, small localities, engineering, planning, enforcement, different aspects. DMV, VDOT sat in on that as well, transit agencies. So like I said, trying to get all these together. And we convened that group throughout the preparation of the regional safety study to get their feedback, both their ideas and then feedback on certain products we had prepared to see what their thoughts were on that. As part of the safety study, we did a very extensive analysis of the crash data. So we looked at the entire freeway system and just over 1,000 intersections throughout our region. There were 5 different measures we looked at over a 5-year period. So that was number of crashes, the rate of crashes, number of fatal and serious injury crashes, the same thing for rate, and then also potential for safety improvement, which VDOT prepares that analysis. But just looking at, based on the characteristics of a location, number of lanes, traffic volumes, things like that, you can project the number of crashes you think would happen there. But if you look at the data and you see, wow, we have double as many crashes as you would expect based on these factors, we say that has a high potential for safety improvement. So we looked at those as well. Once we had this analysis done, we shared all this information with each of the 16 localities in our region here, and we asked them specifically which ones they would like us to look at in further detail as part of our study. So for some localities, maybe fatalities and serious injuries are more important. Maybe for others, it's crash rate. In a number of localities, maybe they know their locations that are 1, 2, and 3, but they've never looked at number 4, so they asked us to look at that. So that's why we thought it made the most sense to ask them for their thoughts in terms of what we should look at based on the data we shared with them. So the list on the right, working with the localities, those were the 16 that were agreed to. So I won't go into too much detail, but we did a very in-depth analysis in terms of these high crash locations, all of them. So, we had the aerials, we break down the data, we prepared collision diagrams, so you can look graphically and see, hey, these are the crash types that seem to be the most prevalent. Some more data analysis on the top right, so maybe weather or, was driving under the influence a factor, distracted driving, all those, and we compared it to the regional average so you can see which ones jumped out at these locations and maybe were a problem. What I really want to talk about in detail, though, is here on the bottom left, and that's, we did an equity analysis as part of this. Not sure why that didn't pop up. There it is. We did an equity analysis for each of these high crash locations, and we did it a couple different ways. We talked about the transportation vulnerable community data that we have. We did look at that. That's on the left side there, where you can see those 9 factors that Dale mentioned earlier. So whether the specific location, how many of those have met. So this example here is nearby at Battlefield and Woodlake Drive here in Chesapeake. So 2 of those 9 factors were met in terms of this specific location, both in terms of elderly populations that live nearby, as well as minority populations. But what we did for the first time as part of the safety studies, we wanted to drill down a little deeper in terms of the users of the intersection, not just who lived by it. So we were able to use streetlight data that once again, we're very fortunate that the state of Virginia and VDOT has paid for a license, and NPOs are allowed to use that. So we were able to use that information to drill down on the socioeconomic information regarding users of each of these 16 locations. So we were able to determine, for example, the first bullet there, you see average daily trips made by minorities. We know at that location and then how that compares to a regional average. So we can highlight the ones where maybe it's disproportionately used by minorities, or maybe by where English is spoken less than very well. We can highlight those in particular and say, yeah, these are, at this particular location, the users of that intersection rank particularly high amongst some of these equity factors. And that's really important when you're talking about SS4A, since equity is such an important part of that program. This is the type of information that hopefully localities can use as they're submitting these projects for SS4A funding. One other thing we did as part of the safety study for the first time is we did a survey as part of that, because we wanted to gather feedback both from a generic level in terms of what some of their concerns are, but we also wanted them to call out specific locations, what some of the issues they saw at those locations. So it was very well received. We got about 1,500 responses. Matt left. Unfortunately, I can't give him kudos for that. But he helped us disseminate information on it. My face was on local TV way too much when the survey was out there. So, in terms of getting that, I know it was posted on Facebook, Nextdoor, different mechanisms where it went out there. So we thought we got a really good response, 1,500 responses, but also comments on 2,600 different locations. So the information I showed you on the previous slide in terms of those high crash locations, we did pull out those survey comments specifically for those locations. So I think the Battlefield in Woodlake, it said we had 8 comments from the public, and we listed them verbatim right there. And it was really important because a lot of the stuff we saw in the field, you'd look at the survey comments and it would match verbatim what we're seeing out there. So it was definitely good to get confirmation from users that use those facilities every day. So that was really good. I did just want to highlight here, in terms of some of the general survey responses we got, we did want to ask them about what some of their survey concerns were and prioritize them. It was interesting to see in terms of those that are in the top 5, aggressive driving, distracted driving, and speeding all ranked highest in terms of safety concerns. We also asked them to rank their top 1, and it was the same thing: aggressive driving, distracted driving, and speeding. So definitely good information to know when we start talking about solutions, particularly in what the public is concerned about, and maybe addressing those 3 factors in particular. I highlighted speeding, and that kind of I got one more slide, but speeding will feed into the work that Rob did here that we'll go over in a second. But I do want to mention that this was a very, very good process in terms of preparing the regional safety study and working with all of our stakeholders as part of the study. And it was adopted by the TPO board at their May 2024 meeting. So moving forward, we'll continue to convene that regional safety study working group, share some of the new up-to-date data that we see maybe on an annual basis, and then see in terms of any progress they've made in terms of what's included in the study, just to have a follow-up and keep that committee going as we go in the future. So, like I said, with that, I would have Rob wrap it up with a study he did in terms of speeding.
Yes, thank you. So as Keith said, we went the wrong way. We did what we call a crash fatality increase factors study. This was requested by the City of Virginia Beach to try to explain the recent increase in fatalities. And what we found was that, what we were looking for is what's the primary cause of the 34% increase in fatalities over this period from 2015 to 2022, which is the right-hand, middle to right-hand portion of that graph, 34% up. And so crashes did not increase, interestingly enough, but they became more fatal. And so we wanted to see, why did they become more fatal? We thought it could be a couple of things: seatbelt usage or speed, which Keith mentioned. And so from what we found here, the black line is percentage of vehicles exceeding reckless speed, which is basically 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. And that quintupled over our study period from about 0.5% to 2%. Of course, that's a small portion of the people out there, but as you know, their vehicles are going faster. The rest of the vehicles are going faster too, so a lot of them. So we feel that this increase in speeding may explain the increase in crash fatalness. And so we wondered, why did the speeding increase? And so we compared it to law enforcement. And as you can see, law enforcement is in the gold there, speeding is in the black. And so as enforcement was cut in half, speeding quintupled. And I guess that's it. So in bottom line, we felt that the enforcement was the best explanation for the increase in fatalities.
Just wanted to add something real quick about the regional safety study is that we received some comments from other regions that were interested in using some of the templates that we had for the high crash locations, as well as some of the locality staff specifically talked to us and said, hey, we love this format of this template so much that we're going to get our consultants to use that anytime they study an intersection.
I can tell you, I've shared it with my previous MPO of Puget Sound Regional Council. They told me they haven't gotten half the stuff that our team did with the consultant dollars. They got money for, yeah.
And it just so happened the timing, we started our study just as the SS4A was coming out, so, we were already committed to doing the study and then just making sure we fit all the factors in the SS4A, but yeah, it's definitely rewarding work, we really like working on it.
Thank you, guys. Yes.
If I may, real quick, and I apologize, but it's just one of those logistics things. So, dinner's been waiting for about 50 minutes and it's probably gonna need a microwave. So we do have, we're gonna have to flip the room a bit to get ready for our 6 o'clock public meeting. I really don't wanna cut the work we're sharing short because we have so much to share, but might wanna be certain you get a fairly warm dinner, right?
So you want to,
Thank you so much.
can we have copies, the resilience, can we have copies of the presentation? We may come back if we have time to.
You should have everything.
Okay.
Oh,
Put it in tomorrow.
thank you. Right. Well, thank you everyone for your participation, for staying. Apologize for the going over the time limits. I guess that concludes the discussion of the topics for today as we transition into getting ready for the public involvement portion of the certification review. Thank you so much.
Just an announcement for staff. In case we have any members of the public come, we're just asking everyone who's a staff member